And now, open mic. We have 3 open micers in the next grouping. I will tell you who they are so they can be ready. Joshua Bendah, Owen Sheppard, and Jade Wallace. And Joshua, you are up first. I'll ask you to say a few words to tell us about yourself.
Earlier in my life, I used to publish, but I focus on writing now, sort of exclusively, for various reasons. One of them is I found the public very difficult to cope with. Sometimes I write pieces that people love, and sometimes they hate. And I experienced once writing something that people hated, a lot of people hated. And that was a very painful, strange experience. So this is a kind of a poetic, alchemical experiment with language. I wish I did more of it, but I've become very rational as I got older. Poetry seems a little... Actually, I just wrote a poem after probably a few years of not writing one. And I know poems are sometimes dangerous because I like to tell the truth when I write a poem. And this one actually turned into a disaster because someone reacted to it quite badly. So writing has always been a scary business for me. Anyways, that's about as much as I can say about that. Before the left brain had sensed the order of reason, the right brain had spelled, belled, flamed, and dressed the apprehension. Homecoming was groved serene, stretched across the mountains in pockets of surrender, as giant as tame, as surged as listed, poured it into time in increments as vortex of time. The evening shadows had pulled the mystery in. The dark, dynamic portals of sky had drilled footnotes of stars into the sparse and scarcely written pages of Homo erectus. The classic scene was all matter blunted into law, blundered into 100 thoughts that had appeared as a poem. No sense was sense imperial. Cats had muted the sculinary rat's fiction. It was a chase grizzling into the gut of chance. The rat had bone broken the laws of random ruins and had escaped into the keen edges of the landscape. Cat was caned and had slept millenary, the hard stomach of brainless sleep. The X had been scarred into the memory of weather storms that had appeared as virtue of the mind's second and third settings. There was drama pounding her regions into braided time. Alone to see it as one, the rain had sprinkled legendary into the face of history, forgotten and remembered. But what to make of it, what to tell, and how to reap the fruits of such a moment. He had stumbled across the vertex of the summer triangle. His arm had pointed the way on the road and in the sky. Luck had crossed his ramblings into light that was only half light in the half-light of day. The poet had creased his grumbling into a spear and sent it into the air. This is Joseph. This is the Journey poem, and it's one of the more linear poems of the group. Most people, when they hear that beginning, they think it's about nothing. I've been interested in language poetry for a long time, which is the attempt not to raise an understanding through kind of serial language, but
through a set of associations that raise an understanding in a sort of paradoxical way. So this is a little more linear, some of it anyway.
Come thinking like the thinging mind, all at once those interpretations collapsed into the dearth of reason. One widely widening, pulsating, living, drenching, illuminating, receiving, flow, nerving, rudder-like thinking one. The roaring ocean had coughed the seaweed up. Each bulb had centered a wing as if the involuted currents had pressed the sense of water into the order of things. The day was almost half of something, had not become itself. The lens was loose, so people talked what was talked. Like the blue sky, it was a blue sky, but people they came with their histories. They each had wanted something, and it was hard to read exactly what. Even less, some had wondered they knew themselves, what they had wanted, each in her heart, and each in his heart. There was no telling. The path through the cliffs, sun was again sun. We drove east into the desert, those long, stickly celebrations of rising line, budding vibrant red at the tips. They make the secret desert flames visible. We climbed the hot valley rock and sand. We were trailed and people were behind us, and before us they were living theirs and we were living ours. The water was cool at times, appearing cold. Somebody wanted to take a picture. I said no. We left the trail and climbed above into a place gone from people. The wind had funneled her intimacy through the leaves of the palm trees, one tree after the other through the V of the mountain, bouldered slopes like a rushing continuance. All at once, this wishing, and the birds had intermittently spilled a few notes against the surface of the sound. The water fell from rock to rock and mixed with the sensation of the wind. A red dragonfly had nipped through my awareness twice in circles. There was no time to think. Later, a man with a telephoto lens, people crowding around a snake, taking pictures. It was in a bush, it was wavering its head at what all the people were making the sense of what it was. I thought maybe some kind of confusion, a primitive, vibrating, cornered, what? We circled in the mountains, the sun weaving her logic articulate through the landscape. Each leaf and thorn and flower expressed itself as mirrored is, the impulse to be given a form, and I had felt a part of it, a share in her reticent fortune, a flowering lecture in her speechless evolution.
Can I call on Owen Sheppard? Come up. Owen.
Oh, all right. Among other things, I'm a dream journalist, somewhat committed to the practice. So this is a kind of account of a journey to the other side. It's called the Go in Miniature. I found myself in the kitchen of an unfamiliar house, seemingly in India. There was a sense that the house was the back of a storefront, and that perhaps this was the residence of an antiques dealer whom I had come to see. One or more archetypal Indian aunties were cooking away over pots and chapati grills as I spoke with them, and either with the antiques dealer himself or his son. I had brought to them for appraisal a little wooden miniature, naively crafted and brightly painted in many saturated colors of green, yellow, red, and blue, which seemed to depict a young schoolgirl seated at a desk with a book open before her and a low bookshelf. The girl was very crudely done and looked like a nutcracker. Her desk was a rectangular slab out of which her torso projected without any lower body at all, The book before her stood up perpendicular to the slab and was itself just a stylized square of painted wood. I discovered when I pressed it that it and the low bookshelf could recess into the base slab of the piece. I felt fairly sure that this was a trinket of little value, but it seemed it had been in the family for some time through my grandfather's line, and that it would be interesting to discover its provenance. One of the aunties, a kindly lady with smiling eyes, came over to inspect the piece. She smiled knowingly and told me to read the text printed in gold on the white spine of one of the books on the miniaturized bookshelf. I peered at the word and discerned something like absaratato. I struggled to read the word aloud and remarked laughingly that the S had been written backwards. I assumed by the young schoolgirl whose book this was. I told the auntie that the word seemed to be Portuguese, and by this I inferred that the miniature must be from Goa. The auntie told me that it was 300 years old, and I seemed to understand that it was a type of trade gift meant to be given to the Portuguese. The auntie, or the young man who was perhaps her son, then showed me to turn the piece over. Beneath it was affixed a label, and as I looked at it, this label seemed to be attached to the inside crown of a woolen toque in the same colors as the miniature, as though the miniature had been transmuted. The label read, "Made in China." And at once I thought that my hopes of being in possession of a rare, ancient, and potentially valuable artifact were dashed. And just when I had been beginning to view the miniature, not as some odd tourist trinket, which it resembled, but rather high art. But when I read further into the label, which looked like a garment label, I saw that it was in fact some kind of auctioneer's certificate that gave the history of the artifact. It seemed it had been sold 3 times, once for the astounding sum of $2.5 million between various British explorers and imperialists, civil servants, and the like, and it finally ended up in Kigali, Rwanda, in some private collection there. Now I was quite sure I held a treasure in my hands.
A little bit of an intriguing bit of storytelling there, Owen. I'd love to hear the end of that. I'm very pleased to introduce Jade Wallace, who I know very well and whose writing I've admired for a long time. She is a writer from the Niagara Fruit Belt, and her their short fiction, poetry, and essays have been published internationally in the Antigonish Review, the Dalhousie Review, the Stockholm Review, Headland, A New Ulster, the Town Crier, and Pack and Heat, a noir homage to Ms. Pac-Man from AGP Books. Jade currently works in law in Toronto and plays ukulele in the Leafy Greens, a band that has been incorrectly described as psychedelic stoner metal. You can find out more about Jade at jadewallace.ca. Jade, come on up.
Literally all of it, all 3 parts. Hi everyone, thank you very much Terry for that lovely introduction. I was going to read a story about astral projection, but we've had stories tonight. There have been many good stories, so I'm not even going to try to compete. I'm just going to read a poem. It is nevertheless also about a journey. So my ex and I used to take what we called Ontario Gothic road trips, where we would just go to all these haunted places in Ontario. We never saw ghosts, but we tried hard. So this first poem, I'm going to read 2. This first poem is about a girls' school in St. Thomas that was allegedly haunted, and there were a bunch of horror movies filmed there, and it burnt down, because that's what happens. So this is called You Have to Expect Fires. First it was a girls' school, then it was a horror movie set, and finally it was forsaken. When a building is haunted by silence, you have to expect that unexplained fires will fill its cathedral arches and bring it to collapse. By the time we got there, purple verbena was growing in the hill of split bricks that remained. I left you staring at a chain-link fence and crossed a long stretch of pale, arid rubble to a copse of trees reaching their arms out of a ravine. The downward slope glowed with chlorophyll and sunlight. Rocks, half buried in leaf litter, were making arcane patterns on the ground, like crop circles, like Nazca lines, like the seats and stage of an outdoor theater that fire could not touch. No young spirits wandered, but birds walked the earth miming field mice and reciting soliloquies for low-lying plants. And the second poem is a more sort of... I like that really hesitant little clap. That's good. Okay, this one's a more sort of generic travel poem, mundane in its concerns. It's called The Lost Rooms. We drive 8 hours a day, scavenge French fries and spaghetti from family diners, then lock ourselves in our motel rooms and marvel at the nostalgia of cable TV. At night, our lives back home are nothing more to us than one of yesterday's reruns. The world is only the strip of highway that we can see through the gap in the curtains. Some nights, when I can't sleep, I take bills out of my wallet and spread them across a desk. I don't count them. I sit quietly and resent every dollar for being so small. Money is the only hitch that keeps us from disappearing.